everybody. Welcome. It's so nice that you decided to join this talk. And it's actually like that time where most people want to go for lunch or want to have a little walk. So I'm very glad that you decided to stay a little bit longer for this session. We're going to talk today about the co-creation between UX and software, so the collaboration between designers and developers. And let's see how we can improve a little bit on that. But just to get a little bit of an impression of who we have here in this room with us today, can I see some hands of all the people that call themselves a developer or a software engineer, like whatever you like? Okay, that's like 80%, right? 90, 80%?
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Do we then also have people in the room that define themselves as a designer? Okay, well, can we get an applause, please? For yeah, thanks. Nice of you to join. Welcome, everybody. So now that we know a little bit more about you guys, let's introduce ourselves. This is Thamar. Thamar is the Global Director User Experience Design of Adidas at the moment, and she lives and breathes everything that's sport related. Like, she's very talented with karate. She just got her 5th dan. I'm not sure if you know what that means, but it's very high. And she loves everything about it. But when it comes down to work, she loves simplifying things because she believes people are not stupid. I'm not sure if that's correct, but like, people are not stupid, but things are just not designed the way that people would expect it to. So with that being said, and Adidas' motto in mind, she believes that impossible is nothing.
Yes, and I'm standing together with Simone, who did the lovely introduction. And yes, Simone actually has a very, unique background of studying speech therapy. And then she went into speech therapy. For some of you who joined her talk yesterday, you could see how she shared her knowledge about learning new languages and how to cope with that. Then she actually also wanted to be at one point a star, a singing star. Yeah, to be on stage, but she's on stage today. But after the speech therapist and working that out, she found out that's not really her thing, but her thing is still solving problems, helping others, you name it. And that's also her passion, and the passion that was mutual when we started talking, really solving problems for people and for users. So she joined a traineeship and became a developer. And it's for me a real privilege to stand on stage with you today.
Likewise.
So let's kick it off. What we're going to discuss today is the team. So we're going to talk about how to set up a team and what makes a team successful, and when to co-create as a team and when you shouldn't co-create between designers and developers, but all do your own thing and be really good at what you do. The process, how you can collaborate, and then also the details of that process. So we're going to go into some tools and ways of thinking and processes that we've used ourselves and
make it a little bit more practical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, before we really dive into the teams, we just want to engage you a little bit because 50 minutes is a long time, right? So we need to get you engaged to stick with us the full 50 minutes. And in order to do that, you kind of need to know why you are here, because the why moves us all, right? And in order to do that, I would like to give a little bit of an example. So imagine we have this painter, like he's painting art on canvas and he's creating beautiful art. And one day he gets an assignment from a middleman. Now, this middleman has a client, a customer, and that customer is requesting a painting of a forest. So the middleman goes to the painter, asking him, can you please draw this painting of a forest? So the painter goes ahead, and when he's done, after a month, 2 months, he created this beautiful forest. It's one of the best paintings he's made so far. Like, it's so realistic. The colors, mwah, it's brilliant. But when the painting gets transferred to the customer, the customer is very disappointed. Even though it's a beautiful forest, the customer is actually that kind of person that loves like abstract art. You know it? Like he really wished that it would be more like this, like that you can like have the drawings and that it's more, you need to think about it a little bit harder to get it. And that's what the customer likes. And next to that, the customer actually wanted to hang the painting outside, like in
The garden.
in the garden, in the seating area. But unfortunately, he can because the painter drawed this picture with watercoloring. So like it's not sufficient for rain, right? Like one rainy day and everything is washed away, even though it would be fitting for this picture. But the drawing would be destroyed. Now, what is happening here? There are two things I think we can mainly see at this point. One side is that the painter didn't know his customer. He only got told by a middleman, and he didn't really know about the needs and the wishes of the person that he was delivering for. Now you might say, okay, but that's like, we could have easily like mitigated that issue if the middleman had just given a little bit more information about the user, right? Like about the customer. He could have told that the customer was an abstract kind of person. But the next thing that comes to mind is about the watercoloring, because even though the painter knows that he has this whole toolkit, like with different colors and different bases on which your coloring is based, the middleman didn't know about that. Like he didn't even think to mention that it was supposed to be in a garden, because he didn't think that was relevant information, because he didn't know about the toolkit. And I hope that you already see some like lines with IT and design and developers going on here, that we as a developer team, most of the time, we don't know our customers that well. We highly depend on the information that we're getting from our middleman. And our middleman is doing the best that he or she can with delivering that information. However, they don't know about our toolkit, right? They don't know about everything that we have to offer. So they also cannot always give us the information that is relevant to us. It's only when we really start working together and we're really trying to fill in the gaps together that we can make that complete picture. So that's all nice and dandy, right? I hope that everybody sees what I'm getting here at. But I can hear some skeptics in the room saying like,
yeah, we already have too many meetings. So if we have to do that process, I mean, where does it end?
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I also feel that they just don't get us. Like if I start talking to it's like talking to a Chinese person. Like they don't get, like it's a different language.
Yes, and I cannot guarantee my quality of my design work when I need to do 100 things at a time.
But does that mean that I am also responsible of the design? Is that now my responsibility?
Well, we have roles for reasons, right? Does everybody need to have the same skill set?
Yeah, and I kind of I noticed that when we are in meetings together and they start talking about their design part, that I kind of tune out. Yeah.
Hey, I don't get paid to do this.
Nice. Okay, let's get it over with then. Yeah, so some of the complaints that we've heard a lot around us, and maybe we even said one or two of those ourselves, they are very valid concerns. And I think we can just wipe them away, but that doesn't solve the issue. We need to face all of them, and we need to figure out a way in which we can effectively deal with those. So that's what we're trying to do in this meeting, getting most of those stuff out of the way so that hopefully it's less of a burden.
Yes, and we can do that by first looking at the right team setup. So we're not saying we should all do the same things and really paint that painting together, but really work together. And the best way of working together, if you have the team that understands each other's skill sets, but also the personality. So I need to understand what is your mindset, but also your personal values. So for instance, I've talked to designers before that were looking for a new role or something, and they were starting applying. And then I asked them, why don't you apply for that job? And then they said, well, that's because it doesn't live up to my values. I don't want to work for a gambling website or, whatever doesn't fit with your values, your personal values. And then, of course, also look into the type of project. So once you're in a company, I have that at Adidas myself, that I look into my team and say, okay, what type of project do we have now? And if I have a project on football, for instance, I know exactly which designer would love to work on that. That's their passion and they love it. They know a lot about it, but they're also an open mindset to collaborate on that. But if I put someone on that project that's not a big football fan, but more a cyclist or a runner, then they probably enjoy a different type of project more. So this is what we look at. And then once you bring together those different skill sets into that project with the right personalities at the table, then you go sit together and you discover your team purpose and really say, okay, what are we going to do with this project? Why are we here? What do we want to deliver at the end?
And it's funny, like I jump in here because I just had a conversation, I think last night with some of my colleagues about this whole team setup. And that most of the time, like at least I have been in a lot of companies where reorganizations are like happening every half a year or something. Like, okay, there's another reorganization. Let's switch the teams again. And most of the time, that's very much a top-down approach. Most of the time you get told by your bosses or your managers, like, okay, we're going to switch it in this way. But when you would bear this in mind, it would make so much more sense if it's less top down and more bottom up, and that like the people really tell and have a voice in where they resonate with and what their purpose is, so that like you have the most that you feel the purpose.
Passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that you're a passionate team. So the team purpose is all about your why. Why do you do this project? Because we know, and I love this quote from Simon Sinek, is that people don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And it simply proves you that you show what you believe in. So if you as a team really fit together and you have a belief and a team purpose and want to get somewhere, you will create the best product out there. If you don't believe in it and you just say, oh, this is my daily job, we have to deliver this, throw it over the fence, I'm done, check mark there, then usually that leads to less quality product.
Yeah. Nice. All right, then going to the team structure. So we all have the internet. If you Google for team structures, you can find 100, 1,000, I don't know how many, but you can find a lot of different team structures, right? So we're going over 4 team structures that we feel are kind of the most, the starting point. And of course, you can divert from that, but they make the most sense to us. The first team that we want to talk about is the operation team. So this is a team that improves and maintains the IT ecosystem, right? And they are there to really empower the teams by making centralized solutions. And that is great, but they don't really have an end customer, right? Like they have the other teams, but they don't have the user of or the customer of the product. And therefore, we also discussed like, okay, how is it then, how do we do this with design? And we actually believe that having a design close to the team or in the team is not the holy grail. Like for us as well, it doesn't make sense to have a designer in this team. However, this team does probably work together and offers those centralized solutions to teams that do have a designer. So you still have that kind of close connection to a designer. And to make it a little bit more concrete, I believe that you have
examples are there. For instance, within Adidas, these are teams that make sure the backend systems of the logistics go right. So they need to understand the end-to-end journey, which usually comes from UX designers or service designers. So they have that, but they don't have to work with a designer day to day to create and develop that solution.
Yeah, nice. The second team, and that is where the real collaboration comes in, is the process team. So the process team is there to improve and maintain an entire customer journey, an entire business process. And it does that from the front to the end. And therefore, they really need to have a close understanding of their purpose, of their design. And so it makes a lot of sense that the designers are in the team, right? So like you can, I think, does this work?
No, a developer with a gadget.
Yeah. Hey. So you see the designers in purple.
I don't see it. We just saw it, but
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay, it doesn't work on the big screen. No. However, but they work closely together. They are in one team and they join the same meetings, right? Because they are really they are just regular team members.
Yeah. So we have process teams, for instance, in the Adidas app. Team, they really work together for the next functionality in the app, but also, for instance, on checkout, and that can even be specific per market because the delivery process can be very different, and the delivery promise that you have to make online can be very different from one market to the other because they have different processes and work with different vendors.
Yeah. And those team structures, of course, also highly depend on which company you work for, right? Do you work for a very big company? Is it a worldwide company? Is it a small startup, scale up? Like it highly depends. These types of teams that are fully responsible for an entire customer journey are more likely, not exclusively, but more likely to be seen in smaller companies because they oversee the entire customer journey. A little bit different from like a big company like Adidas, where a customer journey can be so long and so big. So therefore, we have the feature teams, and the feature teams are teams. They are the teams at the bottom, and they are teams that are responsible for one functionality or a few functionalities. And they do that very well. But their functionality is part of a customer journey, and they're not responsible for the entire customer journey. But in order to keep that in line and to keep that smooth, you do need someone to coordinate that, right? And that is where the designer team on top comes in. The designer team is responsible for the customer journey and asks the different teams on which functionality they can offer. Most of the time, it is very likely that there is at least one dedicated designer of that design team connected to the team so that they know about the people in the team, that they know about what's happening in the team. So it is very important that there is this kind of surrogate team member. It's not a real team member, but it is very closely connected.
Yeah, we call him Spock.
Spock.
Yeah, not the pointer, but single point of contact. Yeah. Yes, we do this at Adidas, for instance, with our digital retail design team. So that team is completely responsible for the end-to-end journey within our retail stores. But at one point, they're designing the smart mirrors that we have in our fitting rooms. And the other day, they're designing the self-service kiosk. So you can order products online that might not be available in the store anymore. But it all needs to be connected to our employee applications. So they work together as a design team, and maybe 50% of their time they're in the teams, but also 50% of the time they're into the design team, really making sure the end-to-end functionality works of all the connected experiences and not just one part, not just the Adidas app. Because if, in the Adidas app, you can, for instance, scan a silhouette of a shoe, we recognize the shoe, and then we say, hey, you can we have it in size 40, that's my size. I want this brought to me so I can try it on. But if that notification doesn't come into the employee app, we have a problem, right? So that's why they need to continue to work together.
Nice. And last but not least, so all the teams that you just saw are permanent teams that stick together for a longer period of time. Then we also have the project teams that are purely there for a temporary time, and they create functionality that then, when it's finished, is being handed over to either a feature team or a process team. And with this, it's like you see the dotted line. It's very important that even though they will not maintain it and they will not really see the feedback of the end user they are developing for, that they do have this very close line to the designer, at least, of the team that they are developing for, and which they are going to hand it over to.
Yeah. For this one, for instance, we had this when we first got the new technology of the smart mirrors into our fitting room. There was a dedicated team that really worked on that, but the dotted line needed to happen to the employee application team, because you can request a different size while you're in the fitting room if the size is not good for you. So that connection needs to be there, like in real life, but also between the teams. So that works very nicely in that way.
Okay, cool. Now, this is a little bit of a summary. And with that being said, we're moving on to the process. Because we also thought of like, how do we make sure that we're not working on separate islands, right? Because that's happening a lot as well.
Yeah. We all do that through the lens of the business, of course. You need to understand your business. So it will be very different for me. Working at Adidas than for Simone, working for a client. And per client for you, it differs even more. So I think you need to be more flexible than probably my teams are. And it's very important for every company you're at to understand your mission, vision, and the strategy and the purpose of not only your company, but also of your team. So spend time with your team to set that up. Look at the mission and the vision and the strategy of your company, and then dive that down. What does that mean for our project and what we're doing day to day? And then you go into a design process that we have. So this is a very well-known design process. I'm looking at the designer in the front. Familiar? Good. So this one is of Nielsen Norman, and has been out there for a long time on how we really, go from understanding to exploring, to materializing a solution. And we also have very nice connected.
Yeah, so we also have a process like that, right? Like nowadays, it's a pretty old, like people keep extending it. The DevOps cycle, DevSecOps cycle, you can name it. There are multiple variants of it. But the DevOps cycle is, I think, the most basic that nowadays a lot of companies use. And what it mainly involves is that the team is both responsible of the development cycle as of the maintaining the operational cycle. So we code, and then afterwards we also put it in production, and we also maintain and fix it if it's necessary. So as I said, a lot of people have already expanded this model. You can find a lot of variants of it, and we thought, why not create an extra one? So we came up with this triangle,
where we combine the design, the development, and the ops process. And as you can see, it all starts in the middle with the plan. So, there could be an additional cycle to this where you talk to the business, right? Where you have a marketeer or a product owner or a project manager, you name it. They go through their own cycle. But we stick for now with what we're...
For the team members.
what we know and what we're good at. And then it all starts with the plan. You do that with someone from the business, of course. You all sit down together as one team to plan on what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And then the first thing that you go into is the emphasize phase, where you really look into, okay, who's my user group? Who will be using this? What are they doing day to day? What does the process and the context look like? And then you go define the solution. So you probably see, what's going right, where you have improvements, and then you're going to say, okay, this is the direction that we need to go into. And this is also where we have the design direction after the define phase. Then you go into ideation, a lot of wireframing ideas, prototyping, validation, and then we go into the development process through planning again, code, build, and you test, and then you validate again together with design, go into the plan phase, And then you go into your operations phase with release, deploy, operate, and monitor.
But do we need to collaborate on each and every one of them?
This is what we discussed, right? This was our discussion point. So what we did a little color scheming of where we think it's the right moments to collaborate. You can collaborate throughout the whole process, and we really encourage you to do that. But definitely on these highlighted parts, we said that's where you need to collaborate to really be a high-performing team.
Yeah, deliver the most customer value as well.
Yeah,
and that's on the ideate, prototype, and then of course always the plan. The plan you're just doing together throughout all the phases, and then the testing, the validation, and later on the monitoring. And I think we dive into it a little bit while we go, right?
Yes, yeah. Let's dive into it.
All right. So we start now with the section, the details. We're going over some tips and tricks, and I hope the roof doesn't collapse. And the first thing we want to start with is the emphasize and,
Define.
Define stage. And that is, if you remember, where we didn't have the color scheme.
No.
So developers, we can lean back a little bit and be interested on what you guys are doing.
Always happy to join, but this is where we usually go out in the field and do a lot of research. So sometimes we do this with developers, but yeah, you also see a lot of times that developers don't have the time for this.
I do really like it. I've done it during my career only, I think three times or something, very little, but I did really like it to see my actual customer and to like get the real feeling and also satisfaction of he's using or she is using my product, right? Like that's
always cool. Nice. Yeah. But we really dive into, so if it's a new thing that has not been there before, then you do your user research and your observations. But if it's something that's already out there, look at the analytics and what is the analytics telling us. And then what we do is we map that into a user journey. We usually do that around a persona or a user type. Personas is really a thing, I would say. I don't use it that much anymore. It used to be a thing like a couple of years back that was really, but it's too specific for me. So it's more archetypes, more high-end user groups and target audience. And then you go into a scenario. So for instance, the scenario is we want to do a click and collect order. We want to offer that people can do click and collect in our stores. Then you write down the phases. Sometimes I sketch out a nice image so that people get a feeling with it, like, okay, this is a consumer talking to an employee, or this is when a consumer is just behind their desk, behind their computer, you name it. Write down the user actions, and then what we do is we map out the emotional curve, the emotional journey, especially for things that already exist. Very important, we always map out the pain points. That's not a problem. It's human nature, right? We're really good at saying what's wrong. It's so easy. Or to tell what other people are doing wrong. That's even more easier. But what we a lot of times forget is the delighters. And the delighters are very important. Because what if you have that delightful moment and that goes away when you solve a pain point? That's not good, right? So always keep your delighters also in mind and see if you can make the delighters even go up a bit in experience. And then you map out the opportunities, and from the different opportunities you usually write in the how might we's. Might be familiar if you've done some creative sessions with designers, like how might we do this, how might we do that? And then you go into solutions, and that's really, this is how we can do it.
And I believe that you once told me that like pain point, like it's human nature to be really aware of our pain points in general or the negative experiences. And I believe you once told me that for one pain point, you kind of need to have like 5 or 6 delighters to balance it out. So
solving your pain points is very important.
I found that interesting to hear.
Yeah, and this is what we started talking about. This is always very good, right? And hopefully you've done it before, where you gonna map opportunity versus value, because we cannot fix it all at once, right? We need to prioritize somehow. And then we started discussing, and you said to me,
Yeah, I'm always, yeah, don't get me started. I don't like this model. Or I do like it, but like not how it's practically coming together most of the time. Because this model, I feel this is so many times, it's been generated by POs, by marketeers, sometimes by designers, sorry.
Yeah.
And then at one point we're gonna just hand over, like they did the whole exposition, all the slides that we just saw, they executed it, and then at one point they're saying like, okay, so we're now going to do this in that amount of time, your deadline is this, and the solution direction, oh, by the way, you should do it like in this or that way. Like, I'm so surprised time after time that people are able to map this out without the consultation of developers. Like, I very much get that the value is very, like you can figure out the value very well, but the effort to develop it and like how it's coming together at the back end, and I do very much think that we need to collaborate more on that, because the frustrations are often running pretty high.
Yes. And it's not only the frustrations, but also the money, right? Because for a certain opportunity, you might think, hey, you have that done in about a week.
Yeah.
So then I ask for a budget, and a business case and everything around it. And then it turns out to be months.
Yeah,
and that's
the other way
a huge
around.
Problem. Yeah.
I also heard it the other way around. Like, we have this very difficult task.
Yes.
And it's like a week work or a day. Like, we can do that.
We can do that.
Yeah. All right. So once, hopefully, we collaborated and we came with our opportunity map and we pointed out the one we want to start with, then we can then we can zoom in a little bit. We can understand the customer journey that's necessary for that opportunity. So this is a tool which you can use. You can use multiple tools. This is not a session on event storming. So if you are interested, you can dive in further for yourself later on. But it's just like a peek into it. I very much like it. I highly recommend, if you're going to do this, even though we all love working remote, if you're in an opportunity, please go to the office, close your laptops, and get the sticky notes out. It really helps to be out there, do this together with your team, and let your brain flow without all the notifications of mails and Teams and Zoom and that kind of stuff. So when you're in that room, you have the sticky notes. What do? Well, you start with events, and events are stuff that happened in the past. If you're facilitating this, it's very easy to create one sticky note that's the start and a sticky note that is the end. And then you offer like a free space for everybody in the team to just write down the events that they think are in between. You don't need to make it chronological at that time. Just let them write it down, and then later on, if everybody's finished, you can put it on the right timeline. And don't encourage people to also think about the outlines. Like this session, especially before the coding starts, is brilliant to really think outside of the box and to maybe think of solutions that you didn't think of in first instance. So you have the events, then later on you add the commandos to it. So like what made that event happen, and also the things that made it trigger. So it can be time-based, right? But it can also be a user or anything else that triggers that command and event. You can also have conditions, right? Like it can go one side or the other side, so you also add that. And once you think you're almost done and you have that whole customer flow in your site, then you add your domains to it, or as we call it in event storming, your aggregates. And this is where you really define what you're talking about, because the user that's that we talk about in the first domain can be a different set of data than the user that we talk about in the second domain, right? And if we're talking about users later on in refinements, it's very nice to know, okay, we're now talking about the user in domain A because that user only has a name and an email address, whereas the user in domain B has already like an account number or an address added to it. So we know what we're talking about. And yeah, when you do that, it could look something like this. This is an example of a previous company or assignment I worked on. Very fun to do. And yeah, it just gets you out there, I think. And then,
so once you've done your event stormings, you know your opportunities, then this is what you've mapped out, right? You've mapped out your journey, looked at the opportunities and maybe defined different solutions that you want to try out. So then you zoom in on one opportunity, maybe with multiple solutions, but preferably one or two solutions. And then you go into the wireframe section. So you really, say, this is the part that we're going to focus on. And then you create your wireframes or block frames. And this is something you can do together, right? Just sketch it out. It doesn't matter how it looks. Just sketch together on paper, make these blocks. Make some stripes like, okay, here will be your scribbles, here will be text, and that will come. A lot of times what we already do is validate these first ideas and these first assumptions with our user base. It doesn't need to be final designs. I've done paper prototyping testing on Post-its for mobile phones, and you just put a new Post-it on it. If they say, oh, I would click here, just put a new Post-it on it. People get it. Don't worry about it. And then you validate very easily. You just throw away a Post-it and draw something new for the new user test.
So then?
And then in the end, it would be great if you collaborate in creating a blueprint. I don't think this is done enough, to be honest. Also not within my teams. But this would be great. This would be my dream of the collaboration. that you really say we understand the journey, we understand the phases, but we also understand which front stage actions need to be built and what back-end actions that we need and how they work together. And once you've mapped it out, it could be that one team is only looking after a supporting process. That could be one of those team setups we talked about.
Yeah, that's with the feature teams, right? That
could be. But at least you know how it all fits in to the entire thing.
And this would also be your documentation. So later on, when you implemented all the user stories and you're still like the validation cycle is coming up and suddenly you notice, hey, this is not there, you can look back on the documentation on this thing like, did we not have it in scope? What changed? Like, it's really something that everybody in the team can fall back onto. And from this point, you can also create your tickets, right? Doesn't matter like Jira or DevOps, like Azure DevOps or whatever you use. Yeah.
And as you can see, there's a whole process before you get a ticket.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, when I was a designer, I also heard it from you, you just get that ticket. But it's great to collaborate already before the ticket is created.
Yeah. All right. So then we get to the point of the development cycle, right? The coding. And before we code, we all make technical designs, right? Most of the time, I've seen it happening that people create their designs when it's done, because then we know what we build. And even though like it's efficient in that sense that you don't need to redo it, it's not so efficient that you don't know which road you're taking, right? And it's really, it doesn't help with the collaboration, because in the technical design, you can already lean towards your designer to see like, okay, did we understand each other correctly, instead of like that submarine, right, that goes underwater and then comes out a certain period of time later and then notice like, oh, that was different than we expected it to. So some of the tools that I use for the technical design are all UML based, so Unified Modeling Language. I think most of us will know it, but I will go over them a little bit. So we have here a process flow, and even though it looks very much like the event storming session outcome that we just talked about, this is already a little bit more detailed because the event storming will not give you the technical details, whereas the process flow can definitely do that. And because it's so visual, it's also very nice to do this with your designer, or at least show them afterwards. But what is happening often with the process flows is that one person in the team creates it, and if we're lucky, somebody reviews it, and that's pretty much about it. But you can also do this as the refinement session, right? You can do this in your team and just create it while you're refining, just as the notes that you would normally take. Now, a little bit more technical than the process flow, or at least the side of it, would be the sequence diagrams. Can I see some hands who are using sequence diagrams or did it in the past? All right. A lot of people.
Can I see some hands on who shared that with the designer?
Not that much. Not that much.
And this is what we discovered as well. I mean, we were talking about this. Simone was showing me this, and then I said, this is great information for designers, because then we know, how it all works, and when we need to create a certain call out or an additional page or an error message and these kind of things. So that was our recommendation to each other, right? Let's share. Let's start sharing.
Because most of the time for designers, it just ends at the start of the backend, right? And from that moment on, it's like this black box with magic, and hopefully the response that they designed for is coming back. But when showing this image or showing a sequence diagram, it already gives you so much information about all the actors that is passing by. Showing this will open up a conversation about maybe performance, about all the things and all the bottlenecks that could go wrong inside the process, and how do we want to deal with it. Because if we zoom in a little bit, for example, this part, there's a user, he has an order and he's inside the basket, and then he wants to cancel his order. It's already nice that if you show that to your designer, they can think along please refer them back to the homepage, or no, I first want to have that pop up saying are you sure you want to cancel this order? Suddenly you have that conversation. Likewise, as with the errors, you have so many bottlenecks, so many points where an error can occur. What do you want with that error? What do you want to show to your user? Or can you even maybe make it this error flow where the user doesn't even notice that there's an error, right?
That's the best.
That's the best. And it's great if you can think along what would make sense and how would the user not notice it, right? How do we prevent them from having that negative experience? Or the gaps are very easily seen. So what happens if that third-party service is down? So sequence diagrams, I highly recommend just to show it to your designers, because it's visual. They will most of the time get it, and at least it will open up the conversation.
Yes.
All right. Last but not least, entity relationships. I'm not sure how many people of us use it nowadays, because most of the time we can just read it from our code base, right? Or we can let it be generated by our code editors. But it is very useful to show it to our designers, or mostly with having security in mind, right? Nowadays, data is very vulnerable. We all are scared of the hackers and data leakages and stuff. And when we show whatever we are holding, which state we are holding in our systems, they can challenge us or help us, saying oh, well, this information is actually not needed. We can get that out of the way. Quite useful. So some of the tips that you can use during your technical design. And then we're ready to code, to do what we love most, and implement it. But then one point we kind of need to know, did we do right? And that is where we test, of course. It depends on what kind of team you work for. It can be automated, it can be manual. But do please have the designer again in like this short line, because they have that frames, right? Like you can validate what was agreed upon. Is it still functioning as we developed it? So yeah, testing together. And then we're going into the operational cycle, because we really want to get it out there, right? We want to get that product to our users. So the first thing we do is we rush to production.
Amazing.
Checkbox. But yes, let's go.
Yes.
No, there are also some other things you can do before going just full blown out into production, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that we as designers, of course, love is also getting feedback before we deploy it and use target audiences and small user groups or A/B testing. So that's a good one to consider. Just saying, okay, can you have a beta version out there? Maybe just for your own coworkers, because a lot of times, we are users as well, just like we are developers and designers, but we also use a lot of times the products that we create. So that's great to just release it to a small audience, test it, get feedback, can be family and friends, and then deploy it to the larger public. Or the same with A/B testing, keep what you already have and test version B, see if it really becomes better.
Yeah, nice. All right, and then we have the operate and monitoring phase, of course. And I feel, I'm not sure if you're agreeing, but that this has been underestimated most of the time. Like, I feel that where we have all those user stories and all those tickets to develop and to design, that the monitoring is kind of forgotten. And hopefully we have this one passionate person in the team that really likes monitoring, and they are just doing it like on the side. But most of the time we don't really pay attention to it. And that is where we would argue to do things differently. Please create a ticket for it and come together with the team. What do we want to monitor upon? Also to get the information on what we want to improve upon, right? It's not only monitoring on the errors, it's also monitoring on the next cycle. And yeah, you have a lot of things that you can think of, but when you work together with the designer, suddenly you're not only checking your CPU usage, or you're not only checking your amount of error codes. Suddenly you also get like input of like, can we make a heat map of like where our product is used and in which area? And suddenly your dashboard is becoming way more user oriented instead of code oriented.
Yeah. So what we love is if we have dashboards. So that would be the best. But this is where we go back into the cycle, right? You go back from monitoring, almost becomes the emphasizing phase again, and really empathize with what your users are doing, and you can see what they are doing, based on your data. But it can also be, again, just observing how people use your product, learn from it, and improve. And then you go back into your opportunities and your solutions. So that makes all the cycles go round.
I think so. So yeah, then we're pretty much there, right?
Yes.
We're pretty much at the end. So I will skip to the key takeaways. So what we would like you to take home with you is take a closer look at your team. Even though you are not a team lead, even though you're not a manager, take a look, start a conversation, because bottom up is so much stronger than top down. So you can start that conversation. And great individuals don't make necessarily a great team. You need to have the collaboration that makes it work and deliver the most user value. So incorporate that design cycle into your development cycle, and be sure that even though you might think that the responsibility suddenly becomes of you all, that's only the end product, right? We're still responsible of our own pieces inside the process, because we do also highly believe in specialities and like in our own talents. But the end product is of us all, and like the pointing fingers is hopefully being reduced a little bit with this. But in order to do that, you do need to trust your teammates. You do need to trust their expertise. And you need to find a language or a tool in which you can collaborate with, so that we don't have those refinements where developers start talking and then the designers are checking their mail, and then the designers start talking and the developers are checking their mail or their builds or anything. And like, let's reduce those meetings. I think if you experience a meeting like that, immediately take it to the retro. Like, what happened during that meeting? Why did we tune out? And why was it then not separate meetings? Like, what went wrong? Be critical about that. And last but not least, give proper attention to your operation cycle, because that will be the input of the next cycle. Anything to add?
It was
All
great.
good. It was brilliant. Hopefully they think so too. Those are the tips and resources. I hope you liked it. On top, the book of Simon Sinek. So if you would like to know a little bit more about that why, about the purpose, what gets you motivated, we recommend reading that. And with that being said, we really want to thank you and hope you have a great day. If there are any questions, this is the time.